welcome to your Window on the World. Today we're having a very interesting article on the power of storytelling. So stay tuned and listen. Hello everyone, how are you today?
Great.
Good. Hey, that's our panelists, and I think they all like stories. I like stories. And Hazel, I know you do. You're so good at telling stories.
Well, thanks. Storytelling is fun.
And people love storytelling. Ruth, don't you think that that's something that every country of the world really likes?
I think it is, because you can find stories from every country in the world.
And Pam, did you tell stories to your children when they were small?
Absolutely. You know, even way back then when my girls were small, we knew that it was important to tell stories to them, but also it's a good time for parents to bond and be with their kids.
So sometimes people forget that that's a good way to educate. And our lesson today is on page 40, and it's the power of storytelling. So we're glad to have these panelists with us. Hazel from our Let's Talk program. She writes a lot of the skits and stories. Ruth, one of our editors, and Pam, also from the United States, who works for Studio Classroom. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And is there anything you want to tell the students to start, Ruth?
Well, I hope that they like to tell stories, or if they don't like to tell stories, they enjoy listening to stories.
Well, sometimes, we need tools to introduce children to just the simple joys of reading, and I think they like to read stories more than they do mathematic books. What do you think?
That's probably true. Most kids enjoy a good story, especially if it has a happy ending.
Mm-hmm. And I think they need to start when they're little, so we'll find out more about that today. So open your magazines if you have them, and we're going to read the first section about down through line 12 about tools for introducing children to the simple joys of reading.
The power of storytelling. Tools for introducing children to the simple joys of reading. Storytelling, a tool to promote literacy. Students in today's world need to have every educational advantage that parents can give them. The easiest and most economical learning tool you can give children is to tell them stories. Start early and continue telling stories throughout students' school years. Hearing is the very first sense to develop in humans. Even in the womb, a child reacts to sounds. Infants and young children who are talked to, read to, sung to, and told stories develop literacy skills at a faster pace than children who do not receive such auditory stimulation.
Well, our author begins by saying that students in today's world need every educational advantage. Do you think that's true, Pam?
Yes, I think, some students find school harder than others. Sometimes it's easier for some kids than others, but we're going to learn in this lesson we can give our children an advantage from a very early age.
That's right. So you need to help them and give them tools and ways that they can learn better and faster.
Well, it says that storytelling is a tool to promote literacy. Now, what is literacy all about?
Literacy is being able to read, and usually read well.
And the word literate, the adjective means that you can read and write. You have that ability.
And so the students need to have every advantage they can. Of course, there's so many things to learn, so many things to do. And so how can we do this? What are some of the tools? What's one of the easiest and most economical tool you can give your children?
You can tell them stories. And you can continue to tell them stories from when they're very, very small until they're in school and even in junior high.
When should they start?
Well, the writer tells us they should start early, and start early. We'll find out, really, you can start even before birth. But the writer here tells us start early and then continue. We'll learn more about that, too. But sometimes parents understand the importance of beginning early, but they don't realize how important it is even later on to continue reading and telling your children stories.
Now, Ruth, you have a girl who's, what, 12 years old
She's
now?
12 now. Mhm.
And how
I still
old
read
was
to
she?
her.
How old was she when you started reading to her about her?
She was probably 6 months old.
6 months old. What about you, Pam?
Well, I think one of the big things, for every new mom wants to do everything right. And I remember reading at the time, it's important to read to your child before it's born. I didn't do that, but I did sing a lot to the baby. And they say that's another thing because the baby recognizes the mom's voice. So yes, but then after birth, we began reading very early to the children as well.
6
Before
months
one.
is pretty early. They can barely speak. I don't think they can speak yet.
No, they can't. And they can't really even understand a page or books. But the important thing is, especially for language development, is the child needs to hear the language. And if you're telling them a story, they're hearing the language.
So that's a good early time to start. Well, hearing is very important to learning anything, isn't it, Hazel?
That's right, and it's the first sense to develop in humans. And so it says here that even in the womb, before they're born, the child can react to different sounds.
That's true.
Yes, they can. And I know a lot of fathers, before babies are born, will just talk to the mother's tummy saying, "Hello, how are you doing in there?" And just have a conversation so the baby knows the father's voice when it's born, too.
Right, and researchers believe that when the baby is born, the child can recognize, especially the mother's voice that it hears so frequently.
Right. So infants and young children then who are talked to, and if you read to them and sing to them like you did and tell stories, well, how does that really affect them then?
Well, they can learn at a faster pace. And I know my brother's children, he's got 3 little girls, and their mom reads stories to them every night, and they could read and almost write before they went to kindergarten. So it really helped them a lot.
It does. It also helps a lot with their vocabulary, because sometimes when Kira was very little, like 2 or 3, she'd come out with a word that I thought, where did you hear that word? And it's from reading stories, because you hear so many different words that you don't normally hear in conversation.
So if the children don't get that, and they call this auditory stimulation. Now that's a kind of a big term. They need auditory stimulation. So what is that?
Well, it's something that causes someone or something to become more active or enthusiastic. So when you stimulate something, you make it more active and it works harder.
And auditory has to do with your hearing.
Your hearing.
With your hearing.
Things that you hear. And you need to listen first. If you're going to learn the language, no matter how old you are, you can't start to just read and talk. You have to listen. So listening is very important, isn't it, Hazel?
It sure is. You need to listen, and then you can try to repeat and eventually have conversations.
So it's very important for people to realize that when the child is very young, these things make their whole life learning easier.
That's right. And if you've ever looked at books for young children, they have a lot of repetition. They'll repeat the same sentence pattern and maybe change one word. So they hear the same thing over and over and over. And that's actually a good way to learn a second language, too.
That's true.
That's right. Well, if we go on to the next paragraph with the students, it's talking about students in the primary grades. We could also say elementary school, usually first grade through sixth grade. And the writer tells us if they are read to or if they listen to stories for 15 minutes a day, they do much better in their reading comprehension or understanding.
Well, that's true. So let's read that whole next section then. Let's read the next couple of paragraphs down through line 13.
Students in the primary grades who are read to or who listen to stories for 15 minutes a day do significantly better in reading comprehension, listening, and have better vocabularies than children who are not stimulated in this manner. Teachers can follow a standard curriculum and add just one more thing to help students do better on standardized tests. Teachers and parents need to tell children more stories. Storytelling helps improve listening and understanding of English. It helps learners improve reading comprehension, reading fluency, and speaking abilities. Stories make learning fun. But, more than that, they are a key tool for promoting literacy.
So, Pam, talking about the primary grades and so forth, now what about your girls when they went to school? Did they have to read at school or did you read at home? How did that work?
They often had reading groups at school, but then we would do reading at home. And my girls loved going to the library at school and bringing home new books that we could read together. That was always a fun day for them.
You need to start that when you're very young. I know when I was in grade school, I'd bring back about 4 books every weekend to read them. And, if you don't start reading when you're little, you're not going to do it when you're older.
Well, another important thing is kids need to see their parents reading. Because if the parents are modeling the behavior and thinking, I enjoy a good book, so then my children will too. So my daughter has seen my husband and I read a lot because our whole family reads.
Right.
Well, my whole family didn't read much, but my mom was pretty clever, and she said for every book I read, she would give me 50 cents.
Oh, boy.
So that was a good incentive. So I started
Incentive?
reading, and I started saving my money, and that was kind of fun.
Did she ever ask you if you understood what you read?
No, but she trusted me.
Okay, you read it anyway. Well,
I'd say I read a book, and she believed it, so that was good.
So if you listen first, and then when you read, you have better comprehension. So listening is still important. And there are some books that the books you can have them read the books even on their iPads and things, right?
Actually, I was just going to say that because my daughter loves to listen to audiobooks. Audiobooks, books that someone else reads. And she'll listen to them for hours. Like she'll put on a book in her room and then she'll clean her room while she listens to the story because she loves that. It just gets lost in the story and the characters. And actually, it really has helped her speaking ability too. She can get up in front of people and talk because she's heard so many people, good readers.
So that's good.
I was going to say about reading comprehension, especially with young children. I think parents don't just read a book. Maybe they'll stop and say, oh, wasn't that terrible? What do you think's going to happen next? And ask questions, and there's interaction. So that helps the child comprehend and understand the story and think about what might happen.
That too, it does help the comprehension, doesn't it?
In fact, there's some books that are even written that way where you'll come to a kind of a cliffhanger before you turn the page and you'll say, oh, what do you think is going to happen? Is he going to meet the dinosaur?
Right.
So if you do read and listen to books or read books, you have better vocabularies. And that's true in any language. If you want to learn a language, if you read, it will help you. Don't just study the lesson the teacher gives you. If you're learning English, read simple English books that are written for children, and you'll find it will really help your vocabulary.
Yes, it will. And another thing that this article doesn't touch on is the importance of reading to be able to write better. Because the
Yes.
more you read, the more you understand how to put words together yourself.
That's the best way to learn grammar, actually. Grammar is not just by the rules, but when you read more, then your grammar falls in place more naturally, don't you think?
Definitely.
And that's a great point, Ruth, because oftentimes our listeners will write in and ask how they can improve their writing. And I have remembered that you have shared this tip on numerous occasions, and I always write them back and say, read as much in English as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. So it says in the second column here that teachers can follow a standard curriculum and add just one more thing to help the students do better on their standardized tests. Oh my goodness, tests. How can they do better on tests?
Well, sadly, that's one of the things that our society places great importance on is doing well on tests. And I don't think I've met any student who likes taking a test. And a standardized test is one where the conditions for all the test takers are the same. Or it's also the same test that's given to everybody in the entire city or the entire country.
Okay. So that's good that you really can read more. It'll help you when you do your tests. That's good to know. But now the next section talks about the teachers and the parents. And they're finding out that not just the teachers, but the parents have to work with us. So that's where the storytelling comes in. Let's finish reading the article.
One can demonstrate the importance of stories by using a hat. Pretend to hang a hat on the wall where there is no hanger. It will fall to the ground. Why? There is no hook. Stories are memory hooks for students. Stories are retained in the right brain as images that later help the left brain recall facts and knowledge far better than mere memorization. Storytelling helps children learn. Besides, there is no better way to spend time with your child than to read a good book together or share a good story. Why not experience the joy of reading or telling a story to your child today?
Well, that's the answer to the question is what one thing can a teacher add? They can tell children more stories.
And I think a lot of parents and even a lot of teachers would be surprised to hear that, Ruth, because everyone always wants to know, what is the secret formula? What new software do I need to go buy to help my kids test better? What new programs do they need to watch to help them test better? What can they do? They can tell them stories. In other words, spend time with them and do some storytelling.
Right, and our article tells us that improves listening. It helps you understand more what you're hearing, and the understanding of English.
That's true, and it helps you speak easier, so it gives you fluency because you hear the sentence patterns and you can say them, right?
It can also help behavior. I know I teach a class on Sunday mornings, and sometimes the children don't behave very well. But once I start into the story, they are all listening so carefully and want to know what's going to happen. So
that's true.
It's also good for the storyteller. You know, it helps them to have more enthusiasm and to enjoy doing different character voices, perhaps. But the children really enjoy that. It's a great way to interact with them.
Well, stories really do make learning more fun.
They do. And one thing that my daughter enjoys is me telling her stories of when I was a little girl. Things that happened when I was little. She loves those stories. And I think all parents should tell children stories like that because it helps them understand their family background. And it's just a lot of fun to think of mom or dad as a little kid.
Well, and Grandma and Grandpa, I remember when my grandmother came to visit us, we always wanted to tell the stories because that was even different than when my mother was young. And they would tell stories about different things, how my grandfather was chased by the Indians or something. Well, those seemed kind of far away from us. But, you know, these stories from your grandparents, what they went through, you need to hear those to pass them on. And they're very interesting, and they keep you listening. Did your grandparents ever tell you stories?
Mostly my mom, but yeah, my grandmother had a few stories, but my mom would always tell us stories. In fact, the last few years I would say, well, Mom, why don't I tell your story? Because I think I know it now.
You're telling her the story, see?
Yeah.
Right. Well, this is pretty interesting, but when this Michael Lockett, who is an educator and he's a storyteller, and he's very animated, he's visited us here at Studio Classroom, and that's when we said we would use his articles, and he was quite excited about it, but he said that you could just pretend like you're hanging a hat on the wall, say, where am I going to hang my hat? And there's no hanger. Then what happens?
Well, it'll fall to the ground because there is no hook.
So how can you expect people to learn if there's nothing to hook or to hang it on? It gives you a way to find out where to put it, right?
That's definitely true. Well, it's because the way the human mind works is we remember things with connections. And if you have no connections to new material you're learning, you can't remember it. That's why when you first begin to learn a second language, you hear a word and you forget it immediately because there's no connection, there's no hook in your brain yet.
That's right. And what they tell us is that these stories are stored in the right part of the brain, and then images that you connect them to help you recall or remember or bring these stories, these images back to mind.
So the stories are the memory hooks for students, right?
That's right, which is much better than just trying to memorize things. When you memorize it, maybe it's okay to take the test, but then a little bit later you forget. But if you hear a story, it's pretty easy to remember.
So remember this, everybody who's listening in, whether you're an auntie or an uncle or a grandma or a mother, that storytelling helps children learn. It's not just tell me a story, but you are teaching them. They are learning.
And there's no better way to spend time with your child than reading a good book or sharing a story. As Pam said earlier, it's a wonderful time to bond with your kids.
And I like that point. You can sit and you can read to your child, but he's talking about doing so much more. You want to have a shared experience. You want to make memories with your children as you help them learn. Then be expressive. Do things to help them remember what the story is all about.
Not only mothers, but aren't fathers supposed to read to their kids sometimes?
Yes, they do. In fact, my husband reads to my daughter every night, and she's 12 years old.
What kind of things does he read to her?
Well, right now he's reading a book to her about little girls during the Civil War in America and the things that happened to them.
That would be pretty interesting. So dads, it's a good way. Sometimes fathers think, oh, well, I don't have time to play with my child, or they'll take them out to eat something, but they need to also spend time reading to them and sharing good stories with them. It's a good way for fathers and kids to connect, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So I think I would encourage all of the parents listening to take some time today and read to your child.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think I'm going to run home and read to my dogs.
Well, they might sit there and listen
we were talking a little bit before, and actually that is a program that some schools and libraries have where the children read to pets, and of course the pets may not understand, but the kids don't know that. So they're trying to connect, and it helps motivate them to read stories.
And my 7-year-old granddaughter is participating in one of those library events. It's called Pause to Read, P-A-W-S, for the doggy paws. But what it does is it gets the kids excited about reading to these pets who are there.
Do the dogs just sit there, or do they get up and bark and run around?
They sit pretty patiently. Yeah. They've been trained.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the dogs are all specially trained to be able to be patient, and basically they just sit there and the child can cuddle up to the dog and read the dog a book. It's very cute.
Don't have any food because the dogs will get distracted and want to eat the food, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, but many libraries in the United States have that kind of program. Right. It's very popular.
That is good because a child does not feel so threatened if they make a mistake or something.
That's right.
So it's kind of good for them, isn't it?
Yes, good motivator.
Right.
And it's interesting, too, once you start telling stories to your children, you'll discover that your children then start telling stories to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My daughter loves to, we'll be driving somewhere and she'll say, Mom, I'm going to tell you a story. And then she'll create this very elaborate story that lasts all the way home.
Well, that's good because that helps her creativity, too. But it is very good for language learning, too.
And I think it's good for a personality. People enjoy other people when they're expressive and can tell good stories rather than just recite facts or be a little bit boring. So storytelling is good all the way around.
So this author here, Michael Lockett, he's an educator, but he's an international storyteller, and he has seminars for teachers, and he's a children's author, and he lives in the United States, isn't he?
Yes, he does. He lives in Illinois. I think most people know the city of Chicago in Illinois, but he has made a lot of storytelling CDs. He travels around the world encouraging teachers and parents to tell stories to kids.
Oh, that's right. He even won the 2009 Creative Child Magazine Storytelling DVD. Got an award for that.
And during that same year, Doris, if our listeners take a look at his website, you can actually see a video of him in Taichung telling stories to a group of students and I think teachers. He's with the mayor, and you can see what an expressive, animated type of man he is.
So you can check out his website. We have it written here in the magazine if you'd like to see that. And he's published 6 bilingual children's books.
That's right. And I'd also like to encourage our listeners that maybe you feel a little bit uncomfortable telling a story. You're not going to be terrific when you first start, but your child really isn't going to care. They just want to hear you tell something.
That's true.
And
they'll
you get better as you do it.
Won't they, if they want to, right? So it's very important. It has power. It introduces them to joys of reading, gives them information, helps them be more fluent. Well, you can't go wrong by storytelling, can you?
You can't. It's something that will definitely help your child in so many different ways, and you too.
Well, and Chinese people have often had storytellers and all their history way out in the street and doing dramas and stories, and most cultures do have. But remember, you need to do it in your home too.
That's right. And it can be a very simple story.
And don't just watch them all on TV. There's a lot of stories on TV too.
Yes, but it's not the same.
But you should read some, right?
That's right. I like the point, Doris, that it's very cultural in Asia, but it's good to remember, don't wait to go out and let someone entertain you by telling you a story. Go ahead and practice the art of storytelling in your own home.
So we hope there'll be some useful hints in here for families, and it will be the joys of reading for the children. It will have them have a good start in life, and it will give you good bonding. So bring the fathers in on the story reading too, right?
That's right. And you'll see all kinds of benefits for both you and your child.
And teachers in schools, if they have stories when they're some of their teaching, I think it'll make it more interesting, won't it, Hazel?
Of course it will. So get out there and tell those stories.
Okay, and we'll talk more about the knowledge, what it does, because knowledge brings power, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. So be sure and be here as we have the same panelists come, people who are good storytellers themselves. Will you all be back tomorrow?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so tune in tomorrow and hear part 2. See you then. Goodbye now.
Bye-bye.